Hey everyone, I'm Red, and today I'm going to be ranking all the Pixar movies, including the new 2022 Lightyear movie that just came out. Over the last 3 weeks, Lumi and I have rewatched all 25 Pixar films in order to get a refresher and anticipation for this ranking. A disclaimer before I start, I just want to say that all these movies are really good. Okay, maybe not all these movies, but there are positives to all of them, and they are all enjoyable to kids. They just might not be my cup of tea. And let me know your thoughts and rankings down below, as these are just my opinions and rankings. So let's jump right into it. Coming in last place is Cars 2. This was by far the toughest movie to get through in our rewatch of all the Pixar movies. The movie lost me right from the start with the spy plot. It opened up the Cars universe in a really bad way. Unlike the first one that had its small contained story, Cars 2 raised way too many questions that had my brain spinning throughout. It has a direct-to-video vibe unlike all the other movies on this list. It seemed like every character was so dumb and so irritating to watch. Them sidelining McQueen was super frustrating since I just kind of started to like him in the first movie. It really felt like a spy thriller gone wrong, with way too much mater. It lacked the Pixar heartstring tug that made me tear up, and it felt like they were trying to sell more toys than put energy into the actual storyline. One positive I can give it is it does have a pretty decent message about not trying to change people and letting your friends be true to themselves as well as accepting them for who they are. But all in all, this movie is kind of a stinker. In 25th, we have another Cars movie, Cars 3. This movie isn't Pixar Gold by any means, but it's a huge improvement over the second Cars movie. And it was nice to see them acknowledge their mistakes and shift back towards the normal Pixar tone. It drops a lot of the child themes and balances it out for all ages a little bit better. But it's kind of a repeat of the first Cars movie story-wise. If you love the Cars franchise, let me know your reasons down below. I just can't personally get into it. It just doesn't resonate with me personally. It was nice to see them shift back to the racing part of the story because, we're cars and, that's what they do. And there's some fun sequences involving racing and training, especially the mud derby race. But overall, it has a bland story, a super foreseen plot twist, and I just wasn't hooked. I tried to like this movie, but it was just okay. 24th for me was Luca. The animation and imagination within this film is probably its biggest plus. The casting was well done and the two main characters are super charming and they bounce really well off each other. But this movie just kind of lacked the dynamic story that many other movies on this list have, and it felt kind of small. It did have a really good tear-jerking goodbye moment at the end, and this movie had a really cool premise, but it had me walking away wishing they would have done a lot more with it. The villain was lacking in a total buffoon. It had a traditional story and lessons within that I feel like have been done before and way better in other movies. Luca is a cute, solid movie with a great moral lesson about not being afraid of change and finding yourself, but I feel like it didn't have that Pixar pop. The characters were likable but not memorable, and I feel like it's not appealing to both adults and children. This one was definitely in the bottom tier for me. 23rd is A Bug's Life. The second movie that Pixar ever made, and it kind of shows. The characters lacked a dynamic feel, and the animation did seem a bit dated in places. I was never the biggest fan of this movie as a kid. I was more of an ants man, to be personally honest. There was a ton of variety within the world, and all the ants kind of looked the same. Within the movie was a good lesson that teaches us to think for ourselves and to stand up to oppressors, and that we are all stronger together if we can unite. And that was a powerful tone of the film, and it really hit home for me personally. I really liked it. The side characters are great with the circus performers, and the villain gave me chills, honestly, and is really threatening, and he has the brains to back it up too. He was cast perfectly and is one of the best villains in this list, even though with the background knowledge of Kevin Spacey. Kinda sketchy. The story was solid, though a little too cliche and obvious, and I knew exactly where we were going beat for beat throughout. But it has the likability for all ages and holds up pretty well enough in my books. But there are much more dynamic and better films to be put above this, so on to number 22, the first Cars. I have very mixed feelings on Cars because it birthed Cars 2 and 3, and I hold a little resentment because it signaled Pixar's cash grab tendencies. But looking at this movie on its own, it's actually pretty good and could maybe be a little higher if not for the sequels and my inner resentment. It's actually very charming. This movie has a pretty good lesson on how arrogance gets you nowhere, and sometimes you need to be humble and think about those around you. Though the setup to this leads to one of the most unlikable, in the first half anyway, characters in Lightning McQueen. He was really annoying and rude to start the movie, and I was almost rooting for him to drive away and not return. He did find redemption for himself, but only in the last minute when he sacrificed the win. The side characters are a lot of fun, especially inside the small town. The story isn't bad and kept it kind of small, which worked well in this movie. I don't want to think too hard about the world in a Cars movie. Hurts my brain. They kept mostly on the roads and in a small town, so the details were kept way more believable, which is the balance Pixar movies need, blending reality with fantasy, which is something the Cars franchise struggles with greatly in my opinion. 21st is Turning Red. This movie has one of the more likable and relatable main characters and a pretty solid supporting cast with their friends. It has maybe the coolest, most unique animation styles in all the Pixar movies, with cool anime roots seated within. It's one of the funniest movies and made me laugh so many times. Like most Pixar movies, Turning Red tugged at the emotions, but for this one it was more anger and frustration than tears. I was really irritated and wondering why she would even consider giving up her panda powers. It just didn't feel earned or make sense to me. The movie had some good lessons about embracing even the scariest parts of ourselves and being open to change, especially with parental figures. But it's a common theme and has been done better in other movies on this list. The story wasn't my favorite, and I had trouble connecting to it in a deep, meaningful way. The third act kind of lost me when Mom turned into Godzilla Panda. Why is she the only giant panda? It didn't really make a ton of sense. If anyone knows, drop me a comment and let me know. I would love the insight. She literally went insane. I can't forgive her after she started destroying the city that easily. So this is a solid movie. Its story just wasn't super engaging to me, and I couldn't justify putting it any higher, but I can definitely see the appeal. Her powers are super cool, and they did a lot with them, which I can appreciate. In 20th place is Soul. I wanted to like this movie a lot more than I did, as I am a big fan of music, and the premise of a movie focused on jazz had me really excited. I was hoping for more of a Coco vibe, but the movie left the jazz behind very quickly and took just too long to circle back. I was disappointed with the fantasy aspect of the movie, and I was more invested in the real-world jazz plot. Though the afterlife was cool, it got old quickly, and I couldn't wait to move on and get back to the real world. I personally didn't care for the animation style of the afterlife. The setting and character design seemed lazy and lacked life. Literally. We spent way too much time there, and I got a little bored trying to find the little girl's spark when it really didn't even matter at the end of the day a whole lot. The message of this movie was great about finding your own true happiness and how achievements shouldn't define happiness, but I just wasn't really that into it. It seemed confused on what it wanted to say and how it wanted to say it. I'm not sure younger audiences will really appreciate that one, and I gotta knock it a little bit for that. If you disagree, let me know. It's a great message, but it kind of bummed me out that the main character worked so hard to get his dream job, and he left the show at the end depressed and still unsatisfied. I get it, but it kind of bummed me out as a musician and hardcore music fan. The music was great and had me tapping along pretty much the whole time. The little girl Soul character was great, and the body swap with the cat was absolutely hilarious. I'm a sucker for body swaps, especially with animals. This movie is very solid. I was just left a little disappointed with the direction they went. I wanted something different, but that's the beauty of Pixar movies. There's something for everyone, and that's not a bad thing. Coming in at 19 is the new Lightyear. I walked out of the theater pleasantly surprised. I wasn't sure about this movie, but it hooked me right away. I really liked the realistic animation style. It added a grittiness to the action sequences, which were also really well done in my opinion. It might be the best looking Pixar movies in some ways. The story about time travel was really cool and engaging and had some really interesting, dynamic, emotional moments about aging. It had kind of an interstellar vibe in the beginning. It had wonderful side characters that really grew on you throughout the movie and you really started to root for them, including a new personal favorite of mine in Socks the cat. He, she, whatever it is, was absolutely wonderful. The casting was solid and it was really cool how they fleshed out Buzz's character in a way that's canon with Toy Story. There were a ton of small hints giving you that nostalgia feeling, but it wasn't over the top and it made sense. Even though it's one of the darker tone movies on this list, it's still really funny and balances out well for both kids and adults. The message of this movie about asking others for help and not putting too much blame and pressure on yourself was good, but lacked a powerful punch that really made it hit home. The movie kind of used up its emotional scene very early and never reached that level again. The movie was just kind of blah. There's nothing really great and there's nothing really that horrible about it. It's just kind of solid all around. It's a good addition to the Pixar lineup and you can't hate a whole lot. The story premise, though cool, fizzled out kind of quickly and I just kind of wanted it to be more epic. The villain Zurg was a bit of a disappointment, though his backstory was interesting, but it just kind of raises a lot of questions as time travel does in any movie. In 18th is Onward. This movie's premise is probably my favorite of all the Pixar films, and as I am a huge fantasy fan, the first 5 minutes of this movie had me so excited to see what they were going to do with it, as the world they introduced looked incredible, but as soon as we got to the modern day setting, a lot of the magic in the movie died. It needed more of a fantasy aspect and less modern day aspects in my opinion. It felt as though we were cramming puzzle pieces in all the wrong places just trying to make it fit together. I wanted to like this movie so much, but I was continuously forced to step back with every scene. I wanted epic Lord of the Rings quest, but the world was fighting the magic at every turn. I wanted 100% magic, but they gave me 50, and it was just kind of a weird blend. The brothers' relationship, though, was impeccable, and the payoff hit me really hard. Him realizing his father figure was his brother that he looked down on his whole life was great and had me tearing up. The twist with the dad being legs was funny, but wore off really quickly, and I don't think it paid off at the end. And the ending kind of bugged me with the main character not getting to meet his dad. It was kind of disappointing, like, why not? You could have easily thrown that in. But there are a lot of positives. This movie is hilarious and has some wonderful characters and set pieces. The two brothers had great chemistry and were both really enjoyable. Though I kind of wish Jack Black was cast as the older brother instead of Chris Pratt. I had a hard time buying him as a loser and nerd. But the quest they go on is definitely epic in its own way. This is another movie kind of like Soul that I wanted to love but just kind of ended up liking instead. It's kind of a bitter disappointment. In 17th is Monsters University. This movie had me nervous for years because I'm not the biggest fan of prequels as they usually play it too safe and the overall stakes just aren't there because you already know the outcome. And the fact that it was Pixar's first crack at it had me really uneasy. But I was pleasantly surprised. The side characters basically stole the show for me. The cast of misfits blended perfectly together. The setting was actually pretty cool. I was worried it would be cliche, but it worked really well. They expanded on the world already established in a good way. The story was pretty solid, but not incredible, and the games they competed in were a ton of fun. The third act going to the real world was really cool and unexpected. I did not see it coming. The lesson about being part of a team and working together was good, but done better in other movies. Having to watch the Kitty character we all know and love work his way through his arc was kind of aggravating, and I just wanted the old Sully back. The villains were a little cliche and familiar, and I wasn't a huge fan. I feel like the demographic for this movie is more kid-based among the Pixar films and less at adults. It's got kind of a silly story and tone behind it. It's one of those movies that I would rewatch for the funny moments and cool scenes, but not really for the whole movie experience. So I have to put it at number 17. At 16 is The Good Dinosaur. For years I had heard nothing but hate on this movie, so my expectations were low, but this movie was really delightful in my opinion. The dynamic between the dino and the kid was great, and their bond had me invested the whole time. The setting was really good, and I'm a sucker for any dinosaur movie. Even though the idea of a dinosaur farming and raising chickens was kind of silly, but I just kind of rolled with it. It had a really familiar vibe with a cross between Land Before Time and Lion King, but it had enough originality, in my opinion, to stand on its own. It surprisingly has one of the darkest stories and themes, which I really appreciate despite the bright, cute animation. It kind of blends in an interesting, cool tonal way. The theme of overcoming fear is okay, but could have been done better, and it's lacking memorable characters that stick with you. I feel like this movie doesn't appeal to all ages as well as some of the other Pixar films. I don't think adults or kids would really fall in love with this movie. It's kind of in a weird place in between. But I really enjoyed this movie. I was invested and emotional throughout. It's a goofy, fun adventure that pulls at your heart. I don't think it completely deserves all the hate it gets. 15th is Finding Dory, another movie I watched recently for the first time, and I was really nervous as I've heard mixed things, but I was again delightfully surprised. The aquarium setting was really fun and utilized well. It introduces some fun new characters. I'm a Modern Family fan, so having Ed O'Neill as the octopus and Ty Burrell as the whale was a delight. Young Dory was super adorable, and her storyline was really well done. This movie gave me something I didn't even think I wanted in Dory's backstory. It's great for all ages, a little more on the kid side, but I enjoyed it as an adult. It gets a little crazy for me at times, especially with the octopus running around, but its tone is consistent and it works. It has the typical Pixar scene where they have to make me cry when Dory returns home, and it's one of the strongest scenes in that respect in the Pixar collection. But the fourth act felt a little unnecessary, and it didn't resonate with me as strongly as some of the other films on this list. It doesn't have the strongest message, and I don't know if anyone is going to walk away from this movie feeling inspired or changed. But if you did, let me know. But this is an amazing kids film and a solid movie in general. It's hilarious, and it kept me thoroughly entertained throughout. 14th is Toy Story 4. And this is where the list starts to get really, really hard. More is said on my Toy Story ranking down in the description below. This is a fun movie with some of the funniest scenes in the Pixar catalog, but it seemed like the Woody and Forky show, as all the characters we know and love get sidelined. Bring Back Bo Peep was a ton of fun. The Key and Peele characters are hilarious and had me crying tears of joy. The villain is one of the more layered of the Pixar villains, although I do think she is one of the weaker villains in the Toy Story franchise. There are plenty of scenes in this film that I would rewatch, but as a whole, the movie just doesn't work the best. Its story feels largely unnecessary and like DLC to the third. It was cool to flesh out Woody's character and give him closure, but I like the group dynamic of the other Toy Story movies more. It jumped the shark a little bit, adding an unbelievable vibe to the Toy Story movies. It was cool to see the world expanded, but it added some weird plot holes. The overall focus on Forky as the mission was kind of annoying and held the film back, in my opinion. It has a ton of great set pieces, but the heart and story felt unpolished in the fourth film. I love the Toy Story franchise and hold them all to a high standard, and this one was really good, just not amazing. If we weren't so focused on the spork, this movie would be a lot higher on my list, as it has many incredible qualities. The ending was divisive. It had me emotional and invested. Number 13 is WALLE. This is another really tough one to place on this list, as this just gets harder and harder. The reason this one isn't higher is it personally doesn't resonate with me that much. Its moral lesson is superb and something everyone should know, so that's great, especially for a kids film. But I feel like a lot of it will go over the kids' heads and they'll miss it and you'll have to explain it to them. They do execute what they're going for wonderfully though. They do an amazing job making us care for the main characters. But at the end of the day, I connect more to animals and people, and it could have used a little more literal life in the film. The realistic future setting was really cool and thought-provoking. It had some gut-wrenching and hilarious scenes. The villain, though super weak, made sense in the rogue robot. It just lacks some of the fun that I want in my Pixar movies. It needed a dash more balance. But I give them a ton of respect for having the balls to make the movie they did, and I really enjoyed it overall. It just wasn't my favorite. So it's my lucky number 13. In 12th place is Inside Out. I recently seen this film for the first time as well. It was good, but not as great as the hype leads it up to be, in my opinion. It is among the top in many categories, but there were just a few things that bothered me keeping it from being higher up. This movie's premise is genius and works well on so many levels, but I'm not the biggest fan on how they executed it. The plot with joy and sadness wasn't my favorite, and it was a tad frustrating. This might be the most emotional movie, literally, and I love it. I wish the emotions were a little more fleshed out though, and there was more of a focused story. I could have gone without joy and sadness separating from the group. The end credits had some of my favorite moments, and I feel like we could have had more of an average day in the life feel, just dealing with normal obstacles. Instead, the little girl had to have her emotions flushed, and it had to be extreme. It had so many great scenes that hit close to home. Its moral lesson is so good and maybe the best of all the Pixar films. It's great for all ages. All the emotions are important, including sadness, and they shouldn't be neglected. I just didn't love how they executed it necessarily. It was so close to greatness, I just didn't fall in love like I wanted to. Its characters, especially the emotions, were really well done for the most part, except for disgust. She could have been more fleshed out. This movie was an absolute treat though. Its plot inside the maze was just full of plot holes, so I couldn't get hooked. Coming in at number 11 is the original Incredibles. I hadn't seen this one in years, so I was pumped to watch it, and I'm sad to say it didn't hold up as well as I thought. I was thinking this would be in my top 5 for sure, but I had some minor issues. Its animation style wasn't my favorite, and I had a hard time getting used to it. It had a slight dated feel to it. It's kind of disappointing we don't get more action from the family. A lot of this movie is Mr. Incredible reliving his glory days, but the film's message is to not live in the past selfishly, so it works, I suppose, at the end. I was just kind of bummed that it took up so much time. The villain Syndrome was a blast and is so memorable. He's definitely up there on the all-time Pixar villain list. I'll be working on that list very soon, by the way. The end when the family teams up is Pixar at its best, but I wanted more of the family dynamic together. In my opinion, Mr. Incredible has the lamest powers in the whole family, so he's not the one I want the focus on. This movie is still an absolute joy though, and it's no knock being where it is on the list. In 10th is Ratatouille. I was surprised how much I enjoyed this film as an adult. It might help that I cook food for a living and I'm a pretty big foodie, so I could easily connect to the character's story and setting. But like I mentioned before, I appreciate balance in these films. It's important that kids and adults can watch and enjoy these movies at the end of the day. And this movie does that very well. It has a very mature plot, but a silly lightheartedness that makes it work. Is it one of the weirdest Pixar movies with a strange premise? Yes. Is it dumb and unbelievable? Yes. Do I really care? No. Does it work? Yes. This movie, for some reason, it just kind of works and I'm not sitting here picking it apart. The animation style is great and has a cool, realistic vibe to it. The cast is great and the main characters are all really likable and complex. It's not the funniest movie in this list. It's not the most emotional, but it has a great lesson in being yourself and how anyone can do anything if you work hard enough. And the story and characters just hit home for me. So The Rat has cracked the top 10 in my books. Everything from here is absolute Pixar gold, in my opinion, and there's no shade being placed where they are. Coming in at 9th is Toy Story 1. Oh, the original Toy Story. So much nostalgia for this movie. If you want to hear more about this movie, my Toy Story rankings are down in the description below, so I might keep it a little short here. It's their first Pixar movie and it holds up wonderfully. Except the animations in a few places, but no hate. This movie introduced some of Pixar's most memorable characters. It's got incredible heart, and it will make you cry and cheer. Maybe even frustrate you if you're like me and hate miscommunication and jealousy plots, but this movie pulls it off nicely. It has some really cool dark imagery in Sid's bedroom and kind of a menacing plot in Sid as well. He's really threatening to the toys, and you actually kind of fear for them a little bit. This movie is an absolute blast and holds up incredibly well. It might just be the nostalgia, but I still think this movie is absolute perfection and greatness. Number 8 is Incredibles 2. This movie has more of what I thought the first Incredibles was lacking. We get to see the family interact a lot more, including Jack Jack, who stole the show in a lot of scenes. The animation stayed true to the old style, which I respect, but they updated it and modernized it and made it look a little better. I was bummed they separated the mom from home, but it led to some hilarious scenes with the dad at home, watching the kids, and getting to see her show off her powers on her own was really cool. There's so much fun superhero action, including more Frozone, who makes me kind of want ice powers. He's a real badass. The action in this movie is probably the best in the whole Pixar catalog. The story was really engaging, though the villain was a downgrade from the first movie, but still acceptable as well as formidable. It had everything that I want in a superhero movie. The music and story are a step up from the original, and the setting and stakes are raised. It's really just a blast, and I can't really hate on it at all. And seventh is Monsters, Inc. This movie holds up really well. It was a treat to rewatch. I don't really have anything bad to say about this movie. It's so much fun and heartwarming and has a lot of charm. Sully and Mike are great characters, and their dynamic with the little girl Boo is a ton of fun and had me emotional throughout. She is one of the cutest Pixar characters, and I keep wishing that she would pop up again in another movie. It sets up a fun world with a cool animation style. It doesn't raise a bunch of questions and is understandable despite it being so ridiculous. The story is simple but complex and ties together well. The villains are menacing and work well as an evil duo, and the plot is actually kind of horrifying. It's one of the funniest movies in the Pixar library for sure. Its themes of friendship are common, but these characters just bounce so well off each other that it's one of the best examples of it in the whole Pixar library. I think adults and children can both get a big kick out of it. The ending had my eyes swelling. All in all, this is a absolute classic, and there's a reason it got a prequel. Coming in sixth place is probably is without a doubt my most controversial pick, I think. Brave. I actually really enjoyed Brave. I know this movie is very low on a lot of people's lists, but I don't really understand. I've never really gotten great reasons to why it's ranked so low. Let me know below. I'm really curious. This was another recent first-time watch, and this is actually the first movie me and Lumi watched in preparation for this ranking, and I wasn't expecting to like it so much. This movie had me hooked right away with the animation style, setting, and story. The characters were all a ton of fun, from the main family to all the crazy clans coming together. And the terrifying bear villain had a layered setup backstory I really wasn't expecting. The plot was really engaging and took a really fun twist a few times with the bear shenanigans. It's one of the funniest, lighthearted Pixar movies, but also one of the darkest, and I really appreciate they found that balance so well. Its message was layered but simple to understand about letting kids be themselves and how family is important. There are so many memorable scenes in this movie, and they work well together. Its mother-daughter dynamic was really engaging, and their character arcs, though cliche, were really satisfying. This movie just kept climbing on my list as I was working on it, and this is where it settled. In fifth place is Finding Nemo. This is one of the most heartwarming and charming movies, and it's also one of the most quotable. Its story of a father looking for his son and learning how to let go is done so beautifully. It's a familiar story thread in this list, but it's done so well that it's not an issue for me at all. I was really impressed on how well this one held up. Its setting in the ocean was a treat and really cool and absolutely beautiful. The characters come in a huge variety and are all given great, unique things to do. I think this is one of the best films that adults and children can both enjoy. It's smart and silly and had me tearing up from joy and sadness. No real negatives for this one. It just doesn't quite reach the heights of the movies above it, and I could easily see this being among the top of many people's list. It just didn't hit me as hard as a few of the other movies. Fourth is Toy Story 2. This is another movie that has a ton of nostalgia for me. It has everything good about the first movie, but it doubles down. The story and stakes are grander. We get new franchise favorite characters in Jessie and Bullseye. The setting is incredible, especially Al's Toy Barn. The set pieces in there with Buzz, Zurg, and Barbie were an absolute blast. Stinky Pete is a great little twist villain, though you could kind of see it coming. not gonna lie. The ending with the bloopers are some of Pixar's funniest work and had me rolling on the ground laughing. The splitting of characters worked so well, and each of their own adventures was so much fun. This movie is a blast from start to finish, and again, I can't really say a whole lot of negatives about this movie, so number 4 it goes. Number 3 is Coco. This movie is incredible from the story to the music. It has me on the edge of my seat every time I watch it. I play guitar, so it's a ton of fun seeing it in animation on the screen, and I can easily relate to the themes and story. The characters are really well done all around. It hits all the big emotional beats and really nails them. It always makes me tear up a little when he sings Remember Me. It's one of the most emotional Pixar movies and I love it. Its message of never forgetting family and their importance is super heartwarming and probably the best execution of the idea in all the Pixar movies. It's got a fun little twist with the villain, though a little obvious, yet again. Kind of a common theme through these Pixar movies. The main character is super endearing and easy to root for. I really cared for him and wanted him to succeed. The setting was super fun and refreshing and allowed for some crazy cool animation. It just resonates really well with me being so music-based. So number 3 it goes. It's not the funniest or most action-filled Pixar movie, but it's one of their finest films and the story is amazing. In second place, runner-up is Up. This is one of the most heartwarming and funniest movies on this list. There's just something about giving dogs voices that makes me so happy. I laugh so much every time I watch this movie, which I really need after it starts off with making me bawl my eyes out. Every time that opening scene gets me. In the movie, an old man gets more relatable as I get older. I see more of myself in him every day. The dynamic between him, the kid, Doug, and Kevin was an absolute treat and worked so well. Their bond and friendship arc is one of Pixar's best examples. The villain didn't make a ton of sense. I feel like he should be dead of old age, so that's kind of a weird little plot hole. But I guess that's what eating natural foods in the rainforest gets you. This movie hits all the beats that I like in my Pixar movies. Great story, characters, and a message. It's hilarious and heartwarming, an absolute treat in every way. So if you've been keeping track, you know that my number 1 is Toy Story 3. I think this movie has everything that a great Pixar movie should have. It's hilarious, has some of the funniest scenes in all of animation. It ups the ante again from Toy Story 2, going bigger but still staying believable. It has mature adult themes on prison, death, and growing up, all of which are done to perfection and so relatable. This movie has one of the most memorable scenes during the incinerator sequence. It's horrifying watching these toys contemplate death. The last 15 minutes are heart-wrenching and felt like the perfect end to the trilogy. The setting is perfect for the franchise at the daycare, and they introduce a bunch of new characters that mesh well with the existing cast. It features one of the best Pixar villains in Lotso. The action is great, the story is dynamic and engaging, and it's one of the more relatable themes and messages that everyone can relate to. Growing up and then dealing with death and change. In my opinion, this is the ultimate Pixar movie. It's not perfect, but no film really is. Let me know what you think in the comments. This was a very tough list to make and it took a lot of work. I would really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. It would help me out a ton. Alright, have a good one everybody. Thanks for watching.